It's a big year down in Fayetteville for Sam Pittman, and helping us break down all things Arkansas Razorbacks in the 2024 season, our good friend Mason Choate of hogbeat.com, the Rivals affiliate for Arkansas. Mason, what's going on, my man? Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you having me on. Just trying to make it through the grind of fall camp. We talked about it a little bit before we got started, but it's a lot, man. I'm glad that I don't have to be out there because we were out there for some of the evening practices the first week of fall camp, and dude, we were cooking as the media. Like, if you wore a black shirt, you were just soaked in sweat after the 20-minute viewing period, and it's like, imagine being a player. So it's hot, but they're making it through it. We're making it through it, and as a football guy, I'm just excited, dude. We got to watch the Hall of Fame game, a little bit of it, and I'm out at practice, and it's just like you can smell football in the air. It's awesome.
And soon we get the real thing, Mason. These dog days of August, very, very soon, will be behind us. So,
yep, I'm excited, dude. I mean, it's just like, you're at the point now in time where you're just trying not to drink too much of the Kool-Aid because at the time of this recording, we're 6 days into fall camp for Arkansas. And I'm like really struggling. It's hard because everything you're seeing for the most part is good. And that's by design, of course. But it's really hard to not look at it and be like, man, maybe Arkansas is going to be better than we thought. And so it's really like having to fight that mental battle, especially as the media, because we get blamed a lot for being sunshine pumpers. And so like you got to be neutral. And I'm trying my best to do that.
Everybody's 0-0. Nobody's lost a game. Nobody's fumbled the football or thrown a pick, right? Dreams are running wild, like you mentioned. Mason, here's something that'll bring you back down to earth. Before we look ahead at this season, let's look back, if you don't mind, for just a moment at 2023. I know you and many Hogs fans don't want to do that, but I think it kind of sets up where we are going in this 2024 season. It was shocking, honestly, how bad it got. 4-8 overall, 1-7 in SEC play. The Dan Enos experiment did not work. KJ Jefferson, who was regarded by some, including myself, as the best quarterback in the SEC coming into last year, he never got going. Rocket Sanders was injured. It was just one thing after another after another. When Arkansas fans look back on the 2023 season, and by the way, this was a season that many actually called for Sam Pittman to be fired. Obviously, he was retained. When you look back on the 2023 season, I mean, what comes to mind? If anything positive, I guess. But what comes to mind when you look back on year 4 of the Sam Pittman era?
Unfortunately, it's like the embarrassing moments, to be quite honest with you, because the first few things I think about are the Dan Enos email situation, where he was like emailing back and forth with a student while on the bus still at AT&T Stadium after getting crushed by A&M. And then the Polar Express incident where, like, in the walk-on locker room at halftime, dudes who weren't even going to play in the game, somebody posted a picture that they were watching Polar Express in the locker room. And it's like just the drama, because there was nothing really great going on the field for the most part. Like, they had their moments. They had an overtime win at Florida. They almost won at Alabama. They had 4 one-possession games, almost won at LSU, almost won at Ole Miss. Like, that's another thing you could talk about is like all the one possession games. Like when you listen to Sam Pittman at SEC Media Days, that's a lot about what he talked about. Same with the players who were at Media Days. So I just kind of get the vibe that, at least maybe from the team perspective, when they think about last year, they think about how close they were. And while there was a lot of bad, the offensive line was really bad. The offense in general was bad. Your offensive coordinator gets fired after 8 games. Just like things didn't go well. You won 1 SEC game. You lost the game 7-3 at home to Mississippi State. All that happened, but they're looking back on it like, yeah, but we almost beat LSU on the road. We almost won at Alabama. We did beat Florida on the road. Like all these times where they were almost there. And so they're trying to do that this year and get over the hump.
And so I mentioned Mason Sam Pittman. Let's talk about the head hog entering his 5th season. What would you say the vibe is right now around Sam Pittman? Obviously, he did himself a lot of favors when he hired Bobby Petrino. That was kind of the shot in the arm, right? And we're going to talk about him in a second. But, I mean, I guess very likable guy. When you think about, like, the culture of Arkansas, Sam Pittman is that dude. We all know about the cold beer comments and embrace the hog. And, I mean, it's very easy, Mason, to want him to succeed and to pull for him to succeed. But this is a results-oriented business, and there's obviously real pressures and expectations and hot seat chatter. So from the Arkansas perspective, what is the feeling amongst Hogs faithful going into his 5th season, and what's the vibe in Fayetteville regarding Sam Pittman?
Arkansas fans obviously, feel like there's a lot of pressure on Sam Pittman this year, and rightfully so. There should be a lot of pressure on him going into this year, and there's a lot of people who, at least maybe the vocal minority. I don't know if that's what it is. It could be a majority, but a lot of people are maybe were vocal about wanting Arkansas to move on from Sam Pittman after last season, and now. Now that it's kind of sunk in that you are stuck with Sam Pittman, whether or not you like it, he's the head coach of the Arkansas Razorbacks. You did bring in Bobby Petrino, that saved face. A lot of people viewed it as a desperate move, especially from a national perspective. You could go either way with it. I think that it was the exact right move that Arkansas had to make at the time. And, at this point in time, I still think that it was the right move that Arkansas had to make. They haven't played a football game yet. We'll see how it turns out. But I think that overall, maybe you could say that Sam Pittman and Arkansas football won the offseason for as bad as it was after last year. I guess you could say that. And so maybe things are a little bit better. I think that at SEC Media Days, he did himself a lot of favors. I thought he did a good job. Mm-hmm. He was asked about being on the hot seat, head on, and I thought he took it well for the most part. After SEC Media Days, I texted some of the guys on our staff at hogbeat.com, and I was like, I think Sam did a lot better today than I thought he was going to do. And so I think that's where I'm at with it. I think Arkansas fans are kind of tired of hearing the same thing over and over again, and they're just ready to see results. And unfortunately for them, they're going to have to wait until August 29th.
So, Mason, with that being said, let's dive into the 2024 Arkansas Razorbacks. We will start on the offensive side of the football. Like you mentioned, the headliner is the fact Bobby Petrino is back in Fayetteville, hired as the offensive coordinator. There's a lot of change on the offensive side of the football, right? Not just the OC. KJ Jefferson is gone. Rocket Sanders is gone. Now slides in Boise State transfer quarterback Taylon Green. We thought maybe in the spring there'd be somewhat of a battle, but it looks like he's going to be the guy taking over as QB1. I may butcher these names, by the way, but Rashad Dubinion and Isaiah Augustave. I may have said those wrong. Either way, 2 great running backs returning in the backfield for Arkansas. The wide receiver room looks really good, and I think maybe is underrated. Andrew Armstrong, Tyler Broden, Isaiah Sategna, all back at wide receiver. Luke Haas, by the way, returns. One of the SEC's most underrated tight ends, I think, as well. There's a new offensive line coach. That's been a real problem, which I think is bugged Arkansas fans almost more than anything, is the fact that Sam Pittman's supposed to be this offensive line guy, and the offensive line stunk last year. You got a new offensive line coach, and Eric Mateos looking to revamp that group with 2 of 5 starters returning. You did add in transfers Keyshawn Blackstock, Fernando Carmona, and Addison Nichols. So, Mason, all that being said, when you look at this offense for Arkansas in 2024, was a major problem last year. What are you expecting from Bobby Petrino, Taylon Green, the rest of that group, and the Hogs offense in 2024?
Yeah, with all that change that you mentioned, you didn't even get to a new wide receiver coach in Ronnie Fouch and a new running backs coach in Colby Smith. So a lot of new on the offensive side of the ball. I look at this offense and overall as a team, I think of Arkansas and then I think of the rest of the SEC, and I'm like, Arkansas just doesn't have the talent that the rest of the SEC does. But that, I don't know if that's particularly true, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Maybe they just don't have the depth. And you're seeing that maybe on the offensive line in fall camp right now. So we can start there because that's where everybody, is worried about because it was so bad last year. It was that bad last year. And so you move on from Cody Kennedy. Eric Mateos comes in. Worked under Sam Pittman as a GA at Arkansas back in the day when Pittman worked under Brett Bielema. And so, they're familiar with each other. When we talk to recruits, they speak very highly of Mateos. And that doesn't always happen. Like it's usually they'll mention their position coach, but they don't really talk the way that some of these recruits talk about Mateos. So I think that speaks a lot to who he is as a person. But they went and got 3 legit dudes who are going to be starters. And the ones that you mentioned, Carmona, they call him Junior. He's going to start at left tackle. And then Blackstock, who I've heard from people that he's just like one of the most aggressive guys on the team. He's going to be at right tackle. And then Nichols could play at center. He could play at guard. Right now they have some injuries on the offensive line. And it's kind of concerning me because they've had two potential starters, Patrick Kudus and Blackstock today on Tuesday was not at practice or he wasn't participating in practice. And it just worries me because then they have 2 walk-ons in the 2 deep. And so that kind of worries me. And it's no offense to the walk-ons, but it's like, this is the SEC, right? You got a career offensive line coach as your head coach. You would like to feel good about your depth at offensive line. And I don't know if they do right now. And so they got to get that figured out. It's day 6 of fall camp. Look, guys are going to get dinged up. I don't think any of the injuries are nothing. This is straight from the mouth of a team representative. Nothing is serious as far as injuries go, especially on the offensive line. So just had to throw that out there. Taylon Green is going to be good at quarterback. He's got all the tools. He's 6'6". He can run 22 miles an hour. He was handpicked by Bobby Petrino in the transfer portal. This is the guy that Sam Pittman said to Bobby, go get who you want. That's who he went and got. The first coach who offered Taylon Green out of high school was Bobby Petrino at Missouri State. So those 2 guys have a good relationship. And I'm just so interested to see what Taylon looks like when he's not in practice. I asked Bobby in the spring, how tough is it, I guess, for Taylon to kind of have handcuffs on him in practice because you can't get him out of the pocket and see what he can really do when he can move. And he didn't compare him to Lamar Jackson, and he made that clear. He's like, I'm not comparing him to Lamar, but it's like when we had Lamar at Louisville, and we knew that we were going to have something good with him, but we really didn't know until we put him in a scrimmage and we told the defense, all right, we're taking the QB jersey off, you can hit him. And Lamar just had an incredible scrimmage. And I feel like maybe we could get something like that with Taylon Green against UAPB in week 1. They returned a ton of production at wide receiver. Now, it wasn't a lot of production. It's just in quantity, all their receivers who caught passes last year are back. Now they didn't have a 1,000-yard receiver. Andrew Armstrong, who led them receiving last year, he's going to be good. You mentioned Satania. Satania is my guy on offense that I just keep saying is going to be really good, and it hasn't happened yet. But he's really fast. He's really talented. He's basically been unstoppable in practice for 2 straight years, and so it just hasn't translated to the field yet. And he's also probably going to return punts, maybe kicks. Broden is 6'7". Tyrone Broden. He former Bowling Green transfer, and he also runs 22 miles an hour. So we're all just sitting here looking at this guy all right, he's 6'7". He runs 22 miles an hour. Where's he at on the field last year? And he kind of dealt with some injuries, but it seems like he's legit going to be the number 2 wide receiver. Andrew Armstrong's the number 1 wide receiver, but Tyrone Broden's probably number 2, and then Satania, that's your starting wide receivers. Some interesting pieces behind them. Maybe we can talk about them later, but those are your starters. And then you mentioned Luke Hasz, who's going to be incredible. I mean, Luke Hasz is going to be one of the best tight ends in college football. He's just, as long as he stays healthy, he's that good. He's really good. And the tight end room is loaded too, because it's not just him. It's Ty Washington, who's really good, who stepped up when Hasz got hurt last year and then got hurt himself. Arquise Gums from North Texas. He's really good. Andreas Pushka. They got him from Eastern Michigan. He's 265 pounds. So, they loaded up. I haven't even gotten a running back yet. I have to correct you on something. I'm sorry that I have to do this. Isaiah Augustive transferred to Colorado.
Gotcha. Okay. That's fine. That's fine.
But they got Jaquinnen Jackson from Utah, who is, I think he's going to be really good. He's a power back type guy. He's a former quarterback. He was recruited out of high school as a 4-star quarterback, went to Texas, then transferred to Utah, switched to running back. Now he's at Arkansas. And he's a big power back, but he's got speed. He sees the field really well. I like him. You mentioned Dubinion, but they got this running back, this freshman, Braylon Russell, out of Benton, Arkansas. He's 253 pounds, and he's just a bowling ball running down the field. And he's he's really fun to watch. I think he's going to be good here in the future, and he'll probably play some this year as a freshman. So I think I got all of it. Anything else on offense?
I think that's about it. Just the the excitement level. I think you could argue there was not a bigger, to your point, there was not a bigger assistant coach hiring, coordinator hiring, more impactful potentially than what Bobby Petrino is going to do and what he means for potentially salvaging the Sam Pittman era. I mean, I think that's what he's able to do. So moving Mason to the defensive side of the football, one of the bright spots last year was defensive coordinator Travis Williams and the job that he did. It was a big year one for them, a lot of positive strides made. They improved in a number of areas. You return Landon Jackson, who was at SEC Media Days, your leader, your defense. Cameron Ball, Eric Gregory also return up front. You do lose Pooh Paul Jr. via the portal. I thought that was a big loss for Arkansas, obviously going to Ole Miss. Who steps up at linebacker? Xavier Sorey Jr., Brad Spence, likely options there. Jaden Johnson, Hudson Clark, man, the back end of the defense, the safety spots, and then Jalen Braxton poised for a breakout year at corner. Are we expecting another big jump for the Arkansas defense this year, or is there reason to believe they may take a step back? How do you view the Hogs defense under Travis Williams in year 2 of his stay there?
That's a good question because I was looking back at their stats from last year earlier, and in the pass defense, they were number 1 in the SEC in pass defense last year. Like it was that much improved. And I want to say the year before they were dead last and one of the worst in the country. It was either that or the year before that. The saying was third and Odom, and no offense to Barry Odom whatsoever. Like I think Barry Odom's awesome, but it was third and Odom because every time it was like 3rd and 15, they just give up a 24-yard pass or something like that. So you didn't see as much of that last year. I do think, they improved defensively. They brought in some really good transfers, especially in the secondary. I really like Danico Slaughter from Tennessee. I think he's going to be good. And they got some post-spring transfers that are very intriguing. They've kind of been the talk of fall camp so far because – so you mentioned Landon Jackson. Like on the defensive line, they returned a lot of production. They didn't have to add a lot on the defensive line in the portal. They added Anton Jukaj, who's an FCS All-American last year. I mean, like he could end up being really good. He's kind of like been hurt a little bit. I don't think it's anything serious. But for the most part, they didn't really do anything in the portal on defensive line, but in the secondary they did. But the big question mark, like you mentioned, Pooh Paul leaves at linebacker. What do you do there? And they also lost Jaheim Thomas to Wisconsin, who was their leading tackler last year. So you lose your 2 top linebackers. And in the spring, we're looking at Brad Spence, who was a true freshman last year, and Xavier Sorey, who I think was a redshirt freshman at Georgia, didn't play a ton. And those are your top 2 linebackers. And we're like, all right, well, this team's really got to do a lot at linebacker in the portal post-spring. So they go and get Steven Dix, Anthony Switzer, and Larry Worth. Now, Steven Dix is going to just stay at linebacker. I think he's going to be good. He could end up starting. It's Xavier Sorey is going to start for sure from Georgia. And then Steven Dix he's first-team defense today on Tuesday. So we'll see how that plays out. But Anthony Switzer and Larry Worth are 2 like hybrid-type guys who could play nickel or they could play linebacker. So they're trying to figure all that out. And Sam Pittman, mentioned before fall camp started that when he looked at the team and where they need depth and maybe the spots that they didn't address as much as they would have liked to in the portal, safety was a spot that he talked about, which was interesting because it's like, well, you return Hudson Clark and Jaden Johnson at safety. But I think it's worth mentioning that now that you have Anthony Switzer and Larry Worth being 2 guys who could not only play linebacker or nickel, they can also allow you to move guys who maybe you were trying to play at corner to safety. So they got like good problems. We talked to secondary coach Darren Wilson on Monday, and he just called everything a good problem because they've got a lot that they have to figure out in the secondary. Who's going to play where? Who's their top 5 defensive backs that they're going to get on the field? But it is a good problem that you have all those different players who could play, right? So we mentioned you don't have a ton of depth maybe, or the depth that you want to have on the offensive line. But as much as Sam Pittman was like, we could have done more at safety, I feel like they're in a good spot, just in the secondary as a whole, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. Now, I say all that to say I think they might be a little bit better on defense this year.
which would be a huge positive for this football team. Looking, Mason, let's talk special teams. Arkansas got to replace both their kicker and their punter as Cam Little and Max Fletcher no longer in Fayetteville. And then Isaiah Satania returns as the return specialist, if you will, for the Hogs. I bring up special teams too, Mason, because I think for a team like Arkansas, when you're trying to overachieve and steal a couple wins, and we all know what the home schedule looks like, which we're going to get into in just a second, special teams can be that differentiator. Special teams can flip a game on its head. So when you look at Arkansas special teams, is there reason to be excited? And who do you expect to step up, both kicker and punter, for the Hogs?
I really don't know yet, to be honest, because right now there's a battle for kicker. It's really between three guys. Hawaii transfer Matthew Shipley, Abilene Christian transfer Kyle Ramsey, and former Razorback who transferred to Wisconsin and came back, Vito Calvaruso. I don't know. I mean, like, I feel like Matthew Shipley should win the job, but I also felt like entering spring ball, he was for sure the starting kicker. And then I left spring ball not feeling that way, and I'm in day 6 of fall camp, and I still don't feel that way. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen there. You know, Arkansas has low-key been kicker U for the past few years because Cam Little, he might be the starting kicker for the Jacksonville Jaguars this year. Jake Bates, he played for Arkansas. He might be the starting kicker for the Detroit Lions this year. And then Vito Calvaruso was like top 10 in the country for 2 years straight in kickoff percent or touchback percentage a couple of years ago. So they've been really good at kicker, but now you're looking at it as a question mark entering this season. So we'll see what happens there. Punter, you mentioned Max Fletcher, Max Fletcher was a practice All-American. There's only one punter in my life that I've seen who could kick it higher and farther than Max Fletcher, and it was J.K. Scott for Alabama. J.K. Scott could absolutely boom the ball. But Max Fletcher in practice was insane. I mean, Sam Pittman would always say he could kick it 2 miles high. And I mean, it didn't feel like an exaggeration when you watched it. But then he would get in the game and it's like he would just shank a punt. He would kick like a 38-yarder with no height on it. And it's like, where's this guy we've been seeing in practice? Now they have Devin Bale, who, you know, in the spring was battling with Max Fletcher. And we were looking at it like, we all felt like Max Fletcher, we being the media, was obviously the starter, but they kept talking about Devin Bale like, we really like what we're seeing out of Devin Bale. And so then Max Fletcher decides to go to Cincinnati, which is where his brother's at. Max Fletcher is probably going to redshirt this year maybe at Cincinnati, weirdly enough. So then they put Devin Bale on scholarship. I think he'll be good. He'll be fine. Long snapper, Eli Stein, he's back. Return man, you mentioned Satania. He's an option. Jalen Braxton's an option, the corner. You know, interesting, though, one option that special teams coordinator Scott Fountain mentioned was Monte Harrison, who is the about to be 29-year-old former Major League Baseball player turned Arkansas walk-on wide receiver, who also receivers coach Ronnie Fouch said, like, he's looking good in practice. So a lot of people felt like maybe when this guy came in, he wasn't going to play. We might be looking at this 29-year-old 10-year MLB vet, you know, maybe playing for the Arkansas offense this year. I don't know. Maybe. Could happen.
So, Mason, as we look at this 2024 Hogs team, the overall outlook, 9 starters are back, 5 on offense, 4 on defense. And as we turn our attention to the 2024 schedule, like I mentioned, we're going to get into this. The home slate really stands out. But going through it, like you mentioned, you've got Arkansas Pine Bluff in the season opener. Week 2, a really important road game at Oklahoma State. Feels like it's going to be somewhat of a tone setter. Then you've got UAB at Auburn as your SEC opener in week 4. You've got the game against Texas A&M in Arlington, which I know that's one, talking to Arkansas fans, they desperately, desperately want to win. You then face Tennessee, LSU, at Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Texas, Louisiana Tech, and then at Missouri to close it out. And like I mentioned, Mason, that home slate, Tennessee, LSU, Ole Miss, Texas. I mean, it is a lot of opportunity, but it's a gauntlet. So when you look at that 2024 schedule, one that's so important for Sam Pittman, what stands out to you specifically?
You know, the Oklahoma State game in week 2, obviously, everybody, you know, on our message board, a lot of fans I talk to, when you look at the schedule, like what's the most important game that you're looking at? It's really that Oklahoma State game. You mentioned it as kind of a tone setter. Like if Arkansas goes in there and wins on the road and then you can beat UAB, assuming you beat Pine Bluff in week 1. Like if you lose to Pine Bluff in week 1, we're talking about a completely different season here. But you could be 3-0 going into the SEC opener at Auburn. And, Sam Pittman against Hugh Freeze has kind of not worked out very well. Hugh Freeze has gone in Fayetteville 2 straight years with 2 different teams and beaten Sam Pittman. So, you would like to see Sam Pittman get a win over Hugh Freeze. It's on the road at Auburn, though. That's another thing that stands out to me is you open your SEC schedule on the road at Auburn. That's not going to be easy. But obviously the home slate is very favorable, right? You get LSU at home for a night game. That's going to be awesome. Tennessee, you mentioned that one. The Texas game is going to be an 11 a.m. kickoff, but anybody who saw the Arkansas-Texas game in Fayetteville in 2021, that atmosphere, no matter what time that kicks off, is going to be awesome. But I look at the road games, and I'm like, you got to win at least one of these road conference games because you play at Auburn, you play at Mississippi State, and you play at Missouri. Let's assume you lose at Missouri, right? Because Arkansas has literally never won in Columbia. It has never happened in the history of football. Arkansas winning a game in Columbia, Missouri. You would like to think you have a chance at Mississippi State, right? But that's a tough atmosphere. You don't know what Jeff Lebby's going to be doing. I want to say Mississippi State plays a team like Georgia the week before. So maybe you get lucky there and you can get a road win at Mississippi State, come back, but then you got Ole Miss at home. And Ole Miss is this team that's, going to be preseason top 10. We're going to see that Ole Miss is probably going to make the playoffs. So it's not easy, man, because usually Ole Miss is a team that you're looking at from an Arkansas perspective as like a winnable game. It's hard to say that this year. Now A&M maybe is, but we know that game's never easy. That game's always crazy no matter who the coach is at either team. When Chad Morris was at Arkansas, the Arkansas A&M games were competitive. So, we'll see what that looks like. But it's a fun schedule. I'm excited for a lot of these home games. You don't have to travel as much.
Mason, I'll ask you the question that everyone has on their mind. For Sam Pittman to return as head coach in 2025, what's the magic number when it comes to wins, or what's the thing they've got to do or show for him to return as the head hog next season?
Straight from the mouth of Hunter Yurchek is they just got to see improvement. And what is improvement? It's 5 wins because they won 4 games last year. So I would assume if Arkansas goes 5-7 this year, Sam Pittman would probably keep his job. I definitely don't think he would get fired. But I never thought Arkansas would hire John Calipari as the head men's basketball coach. So I'm not going to put anything past what could happen, but I think 5 or 6 is definitely your magic number. You would obviously, from an Arkansas perspective, you want to see more than that, but you also understand where you're at on the totem pole in the SEC, which now has 16 teams. So it's I don't know. What do you think? You had a weird reaction when I said
I feel like bowl game is the minimum. I feel like missing a bowl game would be tough to bring him back.
If you win 5 games, you could maybe make a bowl game.
Potentially sneak in. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the reason I made a face was I've not heard that answer yet. Really, that's why. I've heard from some other Arkansas guys like it's minimum 6-6. So to think that he could be back after 5-7 that's kind of new information to me. Which again, we're all and I know what you're probably thinking or going to say is like the way it looks too. It has to look a certain way if it's 5-7 and the offense is high flying. But that kind of leads me into Mason. Is there a real possibility that the stars could be aligning for Bobby Petrino to be the head coach at Arkansas again? Are we living in a world where that potentially could happen again?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that a lot of Arkansas fans want that to happen. I think a lot of Arkansas fans assume that, there's some that assume that's what's going on right now, that Bobby Petrino is running the thing right now. There's some that assume he's head coach in waiting. I don't know, man. It's tough to picture that because say that happens, like what does he do? Does he keep just like everybody that's on the staff and you just move Bobby Petrino up to head coach like after 1 year? I don't know how that would happen. But I'm definitely not going to rule it out. I think it could actually happen for sure. I never thought he would be back at Arkansas to begin with. So I'm not going to rule anything out for sure with Bobby Petrino at Arkansas.
Mason, what's the pick to click for you? The thing that's got to work out in Arkansas's favor for them to say 6 or more wins? Like, is there one thing you look at with this team that just has to work out for them to get to that point?
I think you have to hit on the offensive line transfers because they feel really good about who they have in Josh Braun, who was an SEC second team performer last year on last year's offensive line. So he's obviously decent. And then Patrick Kudus is the other returning starter who they feel, I mean, Sam Pittman was comparing him to Andrew Thomas, former first round pick out of Georgia, now with the New York Giants. So like they think that Kudus is really good too. Are these 3 transfers that they brought in going to be good enough to not only protect for Taylon Green, but to just make the offense hum? Because that was one of the bigger issues last year was like you could never get anything going because you never had any protection. You couldn't run the ball. KJ Jefferson, who we all know is an incredible dual threat quarterback, he couldn't do anything. Like he was just having to try to shed off tacklers here and there, and every once in a while he would have a Superman play, but he never had to be in that situation. And so can the career offensive line coach who has spent the entire offseason, making a deal out of I'm Eric Mateos' GA. I'm working with the offensive line. I'm helping out during practice. Like he's been going over with the offensive line and literally doing what a GA would do for Eric Mateos for almost all of the spring and a good bit of the start of the fall camp. So you obviously need to see improvement there. And I think that that's the biggest thing is that if you have that improvement, then I think that this offense, as I mentioned earlier, like they have legit talent, legit pieces. I'm not as worried about the defense because I mentioned the depth. Travis Williams is back. I think Travis Williams is a legit coordinator. I think they have a really good defensive staff. We haven't really talked about that. But I mean, like Marcus Woodson, co-defensive coordinator, came over from Florida State. Not a lot of people talk about the impact that he has. He's kind of like the brains behind the secondary, I think, because that's what he was doing at Florida State. And then also Deke Adams, he's kind of molded Landon Jackson. You're seeing stuff like that pay off on the recruiting trail now. What he's done with Landon Jackson, they just got a 4-star, top D end out of the state of Oklahoma in the 26 class. And he mentioned Deke Adams and the, molding he has done of Landon Jackson as a reason he committed to Arkansas. So that's important too. I don't even remember what your question was. Oh, the pick to click. Offensive line. Offensive line is what I'm picking.
Mason, last thing, and I'll get you out of here. At SEC Media Days, Steve Sarkisian mentioned that Arkansas fans hate Texas more than they love their own team. Sam Pittman was asked about it. I mean, you got to love Sam Pittman, right? I've been saying embrace the hog, I think, since that week in Dallas. It's just one of those things that sticks. I think it's the mantra probably of the 2024 season for Arkansas. But he was asked about it, and he confirmed. He was like, yeah, I think that's actually probably right. So I'm going to ask you, and what did Arkansas fans think about that? I mean, do Arkansas fans really, truly hate Texas more than they like the Razorbacks? Is that possible?
I mean, maybe right now because not a lot of Arkansas fans like the football team. Like that's pretty evident. Like if you scroll through the comments or like your Twitter feed from an Arkansas perspective, like it's a lot of negative stuff around the football team. So maybe at this current moment, definitely. Now, back in the day, like obviously I'm a younger guy. I didn't experience the old Southwest Conference rivalry back in the day. But yeah, everybody says, I grew up with Arkansas LSU being the big rivalry, but every time I mention that to anybody who experienced Arkansas Texas, it doesn't even come close. So, I mean, it doesn't say a lot about it, but it's a big deal, and so it's probably pretty accurate. And the head coach of the Razorbacks said it was pretty accurate too. So, I'll agree with him on that one.
Mason Choate of hogbeat.com does a great job talking all things Arkansas Razorbacks. Mason, let folks know where they can check out all your work.
Yeah, hogbeat.com, HAWGBEAT.com. We're the Rivals website covering Arkansas. Very proud of all the stuff we do. A lot of free content. So if you don't want to pay for it, if you complain about paying for the hard work that we provide, we got a lot of free stuff for you too. So, and then you can also check me out on Twitter at Choate Mason, CHOATEMASON.
Mason, appreciate you taking the time, my friend. We'll definitely do it again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, man. Had a good time.